Hello, and welcome to day 2 of This Can Happen 2022. We've got a number of eye-opening sessions for you today at the conference, and we're beginning now with this session on understanding mental well-being in the LGBTQ plus community. I've been involved with This Can Happen for a few years now. This is our first work with the American market, and I'm really thrilled to say that the quality of our panel that we have here for you today is every bit as high as we've seen in the previous conferences, and I'm really thrilled to be able to bring their voices to you today. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, but first, my name's Emily Hamilton. I'm Vice President of Strategic Change at RS Group PLC, and also a director of the organisation Trans in the City. So we'll be taking you through our panelists now, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And what I'll do is I'll invite them to introduce themselves individually. And if you can just tell us a little bit about who you are and what your expertise in mental health for our community is. So I'm going to start in no particular order other than what I can see on my screen with Mickey, please.
Thanks, Emily. I really appreciate it. It's great to be here today. So my name is Mickey Demeter. I'm a security researcher for Intel. I've been there for about 15 years, and I speak a lot across the country on diversity and inclusion and equity. I've been doing this now for the last 7-8 years, and this is what I live for, is to make sure that that underrepresented communities are represented, and that all of the things that go on with employers, we always have a good chance of making sure that we get good mental health coverage.
Thanks, Mickey. If we could just move on to Eric.
Yes, hello everyone. Eric Day, Senior Vice President of our Global Small Business Division at Dell Technologies. I'm also the Executive Chair of our Pride Employee Resource Group. And I also am the Chair of the Board of Directors for Out and Equal, which is a nonprofit focused on workplace inclusion. I'm so excited to be here today talking about a super important topic around the LGBTQ community in the workplace and their mental well-being, and ensuring that we are building safe and equitable workplaces for the community through building really good ally networks and good task forces to ensure that we're continuing to train our decision makers at our company to ensure that the LGBTQ community feels safe, equitable, and being able to be their true authentic selves at work. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Eric. Suresh.
Thank you, Emily. Suresh Raj, Global Chief Growth Officer here at Virtue and Vice Media Group. Delighted to come and share the stage with so many formidable leaders on this call. But my real passion, I've been in the marketing communications industry for 24, 25 years. And one of the things I really doubled down on is bringing in the element of DE&I and particularly lived experiences through the work that we create that lives in the world. So that's whether that's through advertising or social content, how do we bring that lived representation? And in that, the minority groups that we talk about, one of them, the LGBTQ space. So I'm looking forward to just talking about that today.
Thank you, Suresh. And Graham.
Hi there, thanks Emily. Hi everyone, my name is Graham Smith. I'm from Scotland originally, but I'm based in New York, and I'm a managing director at VML Y&R, a large advertising network. There I run a large part of our forward business in terms of service experiences, and I'm also the lead for the Human Rights Campaign and the New York Mayor's Office, and I also lead our global LGBTQ plus ERG. And yeah, thrilled to be here today to talk about, just from personal experience, mental health and just how it's impacted me in the work out of the office. And also there's other things and initiatives that we're part of at BMO Y&R. We're also part of the WPP group, and I've had the opportunity to become a trained mental health ally as part of a great initiative that WPP have been running. So excited to be here in this panel and chat all with you and hear more from his personal stories. Looking forward to it, Emily.
Thank you, Graham. And rounding off this amazing panel, Shannon, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I am not in as many spaces as these amazing folks on this panel. I'm a judge in Massachusetts on the Superior Court, and that is what I'm doing more often than anything else. But I think in the larger world, I am in a lot of different spaces, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and talking about bias, specifically as it relates to race and ethnicity, as well as gender and identity. So, with regard to bar associations within the trial court itself, amongst law students in law schools, and in a bunch of other forums, I'm more likely to be talking about those things, or just as likely as I am about law.
Thank you very much. And as an amazing panel, and a real delight to be speaking to people in the US today on what could be a very momentous day for the LGBT community as we move forward. So let's kick straight off into some thoughts around mental health for our community. And Mickey, I'd like to start with you, if I may, and just talk about your transition as a transgender woman, and how you dealt with the mental health challenges of transitioning at work, and what your organization did to support you through that.
Yeah, well, thanks, Emily. That's a great question. One of the things that Intel has done over the years, when I first went to work for Intel, I was not comfortable enough to be out, so I was stealth. And I spent my first 7 years at Intel not telling anyone who I was. And I mean, it was excruciatingly painful. When you can't bring your whole self to work, you're spending all of your time trying to make sure that nobody finds out, or that nobody knows who you truly are. And it wasn't until a few years later that they finally started coming out and recognizing that transgender people need help. And they actually put in, they're one of the first companies that actually gave health insurance coverage for transitioning at work. I waited for a while because I wanted to see how this worked, because so many employers are, they just say they're doing it, but nothing really happens. They actually did it. They actually came forward. I stepped up. They were willing to work with me from the very beginning. They wanted to know if I wanted an HR rep to go and talk to my boss. They wanted to know how comfortable I felt talking to other employees about it. Would I want them to go and talk to the other employees for me? And they gave me so much support on the backside so that I could just totally come to work as who I was and didn't have to worry about anything. And this is the way that all employers should be.
And what impact did that have on your mental well-being, both in the office and outside of it, to have that support?
Well, first off, the impact was just, immediately recognizable, because my productivity obviously went up at work, because now I'm not thinking so much about, do they know, what are the, am I behaving correctly? Am I, whatever. I was able to just leave that all at home, and I was able to come to work as myself and give 100% of myself at work. And then on the backside of it, for my at home, it changed everything. My partner was amazed at the difference that it made.
That's fabulous. That the whole sense of bringing the whole self to work, and what that opens up is definitely something I recognize. Graham, I wonder if we can just talk a little bit about your experience of mental health as part of the LGBTQ community, but also I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts around the differences between the UK and the US experience. Something I'm very interested in.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's certainly, even to start there, I find it very interesting living in the US as a Brit. And I have this joke with some of my friends. It's like, oh, they can't do dinner on Wednesday because I'm seeing my therapist. And I have to say, I love how it's, for me personally, I've lived in the US for 10 years. So I would hate to generalize in case anyone's on from the UK, but in general strokes, I do feel in the US, they're a little bit much more forward in terms of, yep, sorry, I'll be late for drinks. I'm seeing my therapist and it's a weekly thing. And it's closer to, the likes of a, personal trainer here. And I'm really encouraged and impressed by that. And I see that a lot by not just my American friends, but also a lot of my expat friends that have also moved here to the US. So I think for me, there's, on that angle of it, there's a lot more of a positive conversation around therapy and, weekly talking to someone. I think that they're better at that here in the US than we are in the UK. And in terms of just, my experience with mental health and the LGBTQ plus community, certainly seen it a number of different ways. I mean, on a personal level, this happened 10 years ago, but my previous partner, he did take their own life. That becomes like a brick in the wall for you and something that you learn to deal with over time. And what I think is interesting about conversation is, I found that out while in quite a senior role at my company. I was a chief of staff for our global CEO and found out on a business trip. So again, it was very much linked with work. When it kind of went through, and just working through with David Sable, phenomenal former CEO of Y&R at the time, and just phenomenal support that I got. But what was interesting is I reflect on how far we've come in the last 10 years. I think a lot of support was the space, it was the time, it was the constant checking in. I think we're better now at actually getting you signed up for, here is the health benefit, here is the person that you will now meet with on a once a week. I think we could have been better at that, but it certainly got a ton of support from the business. So I think from a personally, I myself, I think all of us, certainly we have peaks and troughs with our mental health. I personally found COVID very difficult. Certainly have spoken, trying to be more open about that with my friends, but I think as relates to the community, certainly that loss for me was a big one. And I do, it's funny, you look back on that and there's a lot to unpack when you look back the way. And again, I just want to be very honest, because this is a This Can Happen, conference. I think I only went to one session, afterwards to talk with a therapist, and I should have really done a lot more. And that's maybe linked back to kind of that Britishness in me coming through, which wasn't something that was just, I didn't really grow up with it. It wasn't around me. So I feel really pleased about where I'm at on that journey now, 10 years later. But I definitely know I could have helped myself more had we been a little bit more deliberate and formal about just accessing the resources that are already there. So certainly that's where just some personal anecdotes, and even within work right now, we can come back to chat about this more, Emily. I don't want to hog the microphone, but certainly very invested in anything that can help us communicate our health benefits. I find as well, there's so many opportunities for us to take advantage, of our EAP phone line. When did any of us last call that? We have all these mental health allies, are people really, reaching out to them? So I think a lot about how do we, even from the advertising aspect, just continually make sure that people are just aware that these benefits are there and that you can take advantage of them. And certainly a lot more that we need to do in that space. So yeah, I'm not sure if that helps. That's just a little bit more about me and some of my experiences along the way. And I would add to that all the pressures that come with maybe being in the LGBTQ plus community as well, like body image, friends experiencing racism, so certainly experiencing a lot of that in the office, and I've seen it a lot more out of the office as well. As a community, we can be pretty harsh, on each other, as well as the hate that already comes to us as well.
Yeah, definitely recognise that. Thank you very much. Shannon, if I come to you as a very visible member of our community within the judiciary, and I would hazard a guess a minority within the judiciary. You put my teeth in for that one. How do you deal with the sort of mental health challenges of being a visible member of the LGBT community in the judiciary at the moment?
Thank you. I do think it's getting better. I think in general, things are better, particularly in workplaces, in work environments. It's an interesting question how I deal with it now, because I think sort of it feels, at least, that the higher up you go, higher in heavy quotations, the less assistance you get with your mental health. It's sort of well, you're in this position, clearly you must be okay and you must have figured it all out. And of course, oftentimes we have not figured it all out. So I think now I have been in the position of being a sounding board, helping other people who work for the trial court and who come in as, say, interns and law clerks and students and attorneys who come in and work even temporarily, assisting them in this way, and just being a voice as to what policies and changes we need to make at a trial court. Unfortunately, a court is one of the most difficult workplaces to make changes at. And as much as I believe we should be at the tip of the spear, as we say in the Marine Corps, leading by example, we fail to do that pretty regularly. And it's pretty slow going to make some of the changes, even that you see, say, in Massachusetts, that have already been made in the private sector. Um, Going backwards in time, and I started this by saying I think things have gotten better, and I sincerely do. When I began my career, I was a Marine, and I was a lawyer in the Marine Corps, but I was also a gay Black woman in the Marine Corps in the 90s. And so, you know, in some senses, there was no real place for me there. And I found it extremely difficult. This panel has been discussing authenticity, which is one topic that I talk about a lot, and the ability to be yourself at work. It means so many different things. For some people, it may be um, your gender or identity. It may be race based. It may be, it could be almost anything. For me, it may be tattoos. You know, I've had a lot of issues and discussions about who I am, how I present, what that means for the space I'm in. And really, with regard to the Marine Corps, back in the days of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was one of the main reasons that I left active duty. And that was not only a detriment to me, probably, but also to the nation, losing one of the lawyers that represents the government and individuals in the Marine Corps. And I don't think that was a positive way to end the relationship. And but it's very real, and I say things have gotten better because of course now it is totally different. We have left Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We are so far beyond where we were in terms of the military workplace than when I began. Coming onto the trial court, right now I am one of three openly gay people on the superior court. um, and you know, there are several courts in the trial court, the superior court being that the one having the broadest jurisdiction, civil and criminal cases, and being a trial court. And that sort of position within this court, it's had its ups and downs, and I try to make it always a positive. And I think some of the changes that we've experienced countrywide, at least on paper and in policy, it's a positive, but it again is slow going in terms of how we deal with each other in the workplace. And I'll stop there. There's so much more to talk about. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think some really important insights in times like we're in at the moment, where there seems a lot of darkness around. It is sometimes helpful to think how far we've come, and also redouble our efforts to fight to retain some of that progress that we've found. Suresh, I'd like to just come to you for a moment, and we've started to touch a little bit on intersectionality. Can you tell me a bit about your experiences of LGBTQ well-being from that intersectional lens?
Absolutely, it'd be my pleasure. I think just for context, I was originally from Malaysia, where I was born and brought up for about 20 plus years. And then I moved to the UK and stayed there for another 20 plus years and naturalized as a British citizen. And I've been in New York now for the last 8 years. So I've been blessed with a very global experience and have traveled around the world quite substantially. Through that experience, quite a lot of cultural nuances and differences across all the regions. And I think coming out quite late in my life as openly out LGBTQ, but also coming from minority, and I come from very mixed religious background of being Christian and Muslim as well, and there were challenges there. I think we all on this panel and everybody dialing in would fully appreciate and understand that being LGBTQ plus in its own accord comes with its challenges, right? And we're constantly facing that every day. And even I actually posted on Instagram, and I'm quickly looking at what I posted, but there was a something that really affected me because, you know, as everybody's going to the polling stations here in the US, somebody made this quote: "May you never know the fear of having your human rights challenged every time there is an election, and may you never know the pain of watching loved ones vote against your right to exist fully, equally, and authentically." So this is the backdrop we all, whatever whatever intersection we come from, face day in, day out as being LGBTQ. What I really want to hone in on this one particular question, it's likely quite controversial, is sometimes, and I loved what Graham had brought up, racism. Within our own community, we face racism. And I think that's what's really difficult from a mental well-being point of view, when we already know within our own community we struggle, we've got a lot of challenges, we try to lock hands and go hand in hand and lockstep in trying to improve our own living conditions and conditions of existence. I think where there are failings sometimes within our own community, there's very overt racism. And it's very difficult because people who come from certain intersectionality, particularly people of color, there's nothing you can do to hide away from it. It's imprinted on your face, it's on your skin. And I think for me, what I'd love to do is one day get to a point where that is eradicated, where we are really in lockstep. We fully appreciate who we are as individuals. But I have in my lifetime experienced that head on within the LGBTQ community, where I'm not seen as an equal. I'm not seen as an equal. I'm treated differently, with almost like a handicap because I'm a person of color within being the LGBTQ community itself. Is there a pill to solve this? No, I think it's being much more open-minded. Individuals need to be a lot more open-minded to actually openly experience different cultures. And this is where I feel very blessed, having lived in different countries and traveled substantially around the world, is there's so much I learn on a day-to-day basis, having continued to experience new cultures that make me a richer individual. And then, it provides me that filter to understand how to look at life in a very different way, particularly, for example, for an LGBTQ person who lives in Bangladesh or lives in the Middle East, because their approach to, or their experience of being LGBTQ is so different. And we cannot simply put a Western point of view on that. So I think being open to enriching your life to different cultures would really help you get over the challenges of intersectionality within LGBTQ communities. Sorry, I was being long-winded. That's my point of view.
No, not at all. And I think as we're looking forward to things like Trans Day of Remembrance, and we know how disproportionately affected trans people of color are by that, I think that's a very valid point to raise up, and something, as a white trans person, I definitely recognize that, and I think we have to work hard on that. Just sticking with the sort of trans theme for a second, Mickey, if I can come back to you and just ask you very briefly, what are the big challenges from a mental health perspective as a trans person at work at the moment?
Well, thank you for that question, Emily. One of the things that people don't realize is that nearly 75% of all trans people have been diagnosed with depression in their lifetime, right? And another 73% have been diagnosed with anxiety in their lifetime. And this is just a huge number when compared to the regular population. So, I mean, mental health concerns for people that are trans or non-binary, right, are so much more important for us to look at. And with nearly 2 million self-identifying trans people in the US and over 1.2 million self-identifying non-binary people in the US, that doesn't include all of the people who don't self-identify. So this is a huge problem, and employers really need to look at this this group of people who are, have always dealt with barriers in the employment industry, to make sure that we all get the mental health care that we need. And this is one of the things that I would really like to see health insurance companies get on board with in the US is, I'm sorry, 12 visits with a therapist per year is just not enough when you're talking about things like this.
Very much so. I mean, we're picking up on a lot of the things which are challenging all of us across the community. And to Suresh's point, we are a community and we should all stay together no matter who we are. Eric, I know you've done a lot of work in your professional career to support the well-being of LGBTQ plus people within work. Can you tell us a bit more about sorts of things you've been doing through your career to support people's well-being at work?
Yeah, thank you, Emily, for asking me that question. I think first it started with my own story. I mean, when I started at Dell 23 years ago, it was the mid to late 90s, and technology was probably not the most inclusive industry there was. And I had to make a decision, right? Very similar to what we talked about earlier. And the decision I made was I worked too hard to come out to go back in. And so what I kind of made this deal with myself that the best way I could destigmatize what the LGBTQ community was going through there was just to kind of be myself. If people were going to talk about their weekends, I was going to talk about my weekends. If people were going to talk about their partners, I was going to talk about my partners. And it did drive, I think, a little bit of a power struggle where the uncomfortability was on the other side. But I got a lot of feedback around how comfortable I ultimately made them by simply just being myself. And so as I got into these leadership roles and I was able to interact with executives, I was able to actually be the leader of our Pride community at Dell. I tried to put those same values onto the members of the community. I tried to ensure that people had safe spaces, whether it was mentor programs driven by the Pride ERG, whether it was open door policies or office hours, so that people felt like they had a safe place to come talk. And I mean, we got everything. We got community members. We got very, I would say conservative, straight, cisgender executives coming in, talking about their kids coming out. And it ultimately started this whole process of destigmatization. We started doing things like transgender toolkits to help people transition at work, very similar to what Mickey talked about at Intel. And that opened up another level of training. We're now doing reverse mentoring when it comes to pronoun training with executives, understanding why talking about correcting pronouns is important. And I think most recently, just to kind of flip the script around culture, I think a lot of what Graham said earlier resonated me with about how mental health is almost like physical fitness, where you almost have to kind of work on it. And I think a part of what we do at Dell to try to drive this kind of destigmatization is we ultimately smile at it. And so during COVID, we kind of created this, like, we decided that we were going to be the employee resource group of joy while people were really struggling at home. And we did some really silly stuff. It started off with this dance party idea where we actually brought DJs from other ERGs that would play music for an hour and a half, and families and people would get on video and dance, or they would just sit there and do email and listen to music. That turned into, believe it or not, a lip sync battle where we actually invited employees across the company to be whoever they wanted to be. We had drag queens, we had drag kings, we had, everything in between, singers and poets and, all these kinds of talents that would come on. And we do these competitions. Michael Dell has been a judge. We've had judges in the community, other executives, and it's just been a really amazing treat. And that has kind of turned into turning Pride into kind of this global activity for the entire company, where we did this entire Pass the Flag initiative, where we had videos of people all over the company passing either the pure new diversity flag that includes the trans flag and the black and brown stripes. We had the gay flag, we had the ally flag, all around the world being passed around to show this kind of idea of unity across the company. And the reason I talk about this, Emily, as a part of mental health is that we do have to talk about mental health. We do need to be open and be honest and authentic about what we're doing for our own mental health, but we have to create cultures of inclusion so that people feel safe, whether they want to be in the office or whether they want to be at home. We need to make sure that we're providing events, activities, programming, so that people do truly feel like they can be themselves at work, because to the point that was made earlier, that is the only way people are going to give 150%. And that is what ultimately drives really good mental health, in my opinion.
Very much so. And this is where I haven't told the panel this. We're now going to do a lip sync battle.
Yeah.
No, we're not. We're not going to do that. I would be keen though, and I'd like to play in something. So you've talked about some really great initiatives there that you've done with Dell. Shannon, if I can come back to you, because you've talked about public service and how that can sometimes be different and maybe slower to change than the private sector. What sort of things are going on within the public service that you're aware of that really do improve that sense of psychological safety for LGBTQ plus people?
Well, at least it's on the table as a topic, as a discussion. Um, the trial court, and I think government agencies in general, we're big on committees, which I hate, of course. I hate committees. um, and but the initial, I think, push, um, we've had about, maybe for, I would say, about 10 years now, some concerted effort to at least have um, committees and groups of people who are working on how to make the courts more accessible to all people. In terms of gender and identity, we have too had the, how do we do our bathrooms now? What are we doing with restrooms? We have dealt with um, uh, folks coming in and working, whether permanently or temporarily, who may be transgender, who may be utilizing the court as well. And we've done everything from bathrooms to pronouns in terms of training. There is some mandatory training now for judges, clerks, court officers, people who really interface with the public all day. And to, attempts to be inclusive, attempts to address people appropriately, and to head off even more menacing conduct, if you can believe it, by staff towards people who may be different from what they're used to seeing in so many ways. So there, I think the focus for the court at least has been suggestions and recommendations from committees as well as training. And they've done, I think, a decent job in making some training mandatory. I think where we fall behind is not making everything done in terms of DEI and inclusion mandatory. And it's something I'm very big on. And just attended a conference yesterday in which the only part of the conference dealing with bias was voluntary. And I just feel that that's a huge mistake for this type of training and programming. But it's one of the ways that I talk about that the court is slow to change. I think the other work is really personality driven and leader driven. So some of it is not cataloged anywhere, but there are people within this court, leaders within this court, making efforts, even on an informal basis, to try to get it. When I say get it, I mean so many issues that we deal with, whether they are regarding LGBTQ identity, whether they are about intersectionality, whether they're about race and ethnicity, religion. It has been, I would say, beginning before the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, but certainly since his murder, the what's on the table has expanded greatly. And I think where the court struggles is, okay, we're willing to acknowledge some things and to do something, but we don't quite know what to do, because it's the kind of place where outcomes for individuals can vary wildly based on what's occurred, why they're before the court, and based on the judge and the staff involved. So there's been some work to try to be more uniform in how we relate to people and how we deal with folks, and to have groups that are actively working on these issues and proposing changes to the leadership, which is it's a far cry from what I'm hearing from the private sectors here, but that's essentially where we are.
I mean, very positive to hear it. Obviously, being in a court situation for a layperson can be one of the biggest stressors from a mental health perspective. So to hear things are being pushed is important, and I think people on the call listening today will be glad to hear that there is a move towards that, even if it's hard and it's a struggle. Graham, can I just pick up again with you? And we talked, and you briefly talked about mental health from the perspective of crisis point and the very worst aspects of mental health. What's going on in your business to support people within our community, but potentially more broadly when they are at crisis point, or they're dealing with family or friends who are at crisis point?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought you were going to make me sing. I thought Eric was going to make me sing. So yeah, quite a lot going on. I will say, what was said there in terms of the George Floyd and inception point, I feel that too, and I certainly feel from our own business, certainly the massive uptick in terms of priorities about moving all agendas forward. There's LGBTQ plus, challenging racism, and so the recent addition to that within our own programming at VML Y&R has been the addition of a well-being ERG specifically. So we now have, as many other groups, we have LGBTQ plus, which I help spear up, and we now also have well-being. And again, we're looking at all the intersectionality and all the support that well-being really is to kind of underpin and help all the other groups as well. And so it's interesting. It's one of those spaces where we do need to be careful, right? And that sometimes things might need a HR professional. So we've been working through what topics are for an ERG discussion, are for a community, and what is something that actually really does need fully employed HR professional help. I would say a lot of work that we've done in the last couple of years. The Human Rights Campaign has an amazing corporate equality index. And if there's anyone on the call who's looking and wondering how might you be able to kind of address some of your policies for how we could advance LGBTQ plus equality, but also that's inclusive of mental well-being, I would suggest that you do have a good look at the Human Rights Campaign CEI index, because it's got a really clear and thorough layout for what it assesses you on, and it gives you some real good direction on the things and areas that you might want to look at to improve, which include well-being. So again, we've been this year, in the last year for us, I was talking about WPP now has a new mental health community. We've been getting that established. I have actually taken a few phone calls, and we're actually really starting to chat to some employees, and I've personally used it myself. So just like looking at things like that, Emily, I think there's also just trying to encourage our leadership to take a more active role in communicating out. We expect you not to work on the weekend, right? I'll say 100 times, until we're actually saving lives, we're not saving lives, right? So again, this morning, set the tone with my team. It's an election day. I'm not feeling great today, as a gay man in America, as I'm sure many others aren't. But, I can't personally vote. So making it abundantly clear that everyone take all the time that you need to go and first of all vote, but then also reminded everyone of the resources you have, because it's going to be a big week either way. So really making sure that the people on my team know that we have these phone numbers to call, like I said before, and just kind of banging the drum. So we're trying to be much more intentional about the spaces that we create, and then protect those spaces. I really cutting back on weekend work for the teams, and also actually stepping that forward with our clients as well. We're very much in a service industry, and we've got phenomenal client partners, but I'm really pleased to say that we're working with Ford on one of my projects on behavioral culture change of that team, and how their behaviors can improve to therefore help maybe the psychological safety of our teams and their other partners. So yeah, we actually have a call tomorrow with our partners on what Ford themselves have been sharing out internally for psychological safety, and I can't wait to talk to them about it, and then talk more about, but get very specific about what are we going to look to change in our behaviors, and really being very accountable with our own team and with our client partners, and we call things out. If something is not comfortable, then we will push back. And and that takes time, right? Like you were mentioning building culture, like building culture as a team and creating those environments. So again, from a leadership perspective, we're trying to really set a tone of create the space, resources are here, reminding people, and also being really quite firm but fair with internal and external partners to just help.
Super important there to be firm in that way. What nobody else out there can see is that we are amazingly, we are starting to run down on our time. We could probably speak for hours. Just one last thought before we take some questions. Suresh, you talked briefly about the intersection between race, religion, and being part of the LGBT community. In sort of 60 seconds, can you tell us, if it's possible, how does that play into these practical things that can be done to improve mental health for LGBT people at work?
I will answer that from particularly from a business point of view, and I'm going to quote Mark Benioff, CEO and founder of Salesforce. And he once very eloquently said, businesses are the greatest agents of change. And we heard very practical examples with what Eric's mentioned at what's happening at Dell, for example. I know we all laughed a little and smiled when it talked about lip sync battles, but it allowed the authenticity of individuals to come to the table. So for me, I think personally, businesses are a great space where you need to have the right representation. So being very cognizant and ensuring you have the representation of all those individuals from the different spectrums and empowering them to live their lives will start to improve mental well-being, simply because there's visibility, there's ability to be our authentic selves and bring that to the table. And that allows, I think it was Mickey who was talking. Forgive me if I quoted the wrong individual, but Mickey mentioned being your whole self at work just changes the way you look at life, and that has a direct impact on mental well-being. So I think companies should encourage the intersectionality by being very overtly active in employing diverse individuals across all the spectrums, empowering them to live their true authentic selves will ultimately have a knock-on effect on mental well-being.
Fabulous. Well, we've got a few questions that have come through, and I'm going to attempt to run through them in the last few minutes here, and I'll open them up to anyone who wants to grab in and answer. I'm going to join a couple together. One of them is, I work in a very traditional banking company. How can I create a safe space for LGBTQ plus employees here? The second one, which I'll combine, is how can I work to offer year-round support to LGBTQ plus employees, not just during Pride Month? And I'm just going to watch the little smiles come up on everyone's face, because you know what it's like. Pride Month comes and goes. Anyone want to grab onto that one and just give a rapid answer?
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do this one really quick. I mean, setting up an ERG is really important, and I know that it almost has become passé at this point, but it is truly. It can happen. We just set up Canada last year. They're already 85 members strong. You will be so surprised at how many people will come out of the woodwork to be able to join something like this, to start the programming that you need. And with good executive sponsor, I mean, some of the best ERGs I know about are at big banks like Bank of America, JP Morgan, PNC. There's a whole wealth of really good examples where banking is actually leading in this space. Another great example from a sister company, a customer of ours, Disney. They've been obviously in the news a lot right now, but they're doing some really amazing things, and they've kind of tagged this thing called Pride 365, and it's like doing this entire motion around how you actually celebrate Pride all year round. And that kind of core leadership ERG is there to actually do really good year-long planning, just like we plan a business, that we do the same thing at Dell. We're doing FY24 Pride planning right now to ensure that we're doing moments throughout the entire year. Truly, Pride will always be marquee, but we do make sure that we have events and things happening all year round so that people are always have the opportunity to drive these authentic moments throughout the year, because there's a lot of really amazing events, calendar moments that the ERG can really get to, from National Coming Out Day to Trans Awareness Week to Pride to you name it. There's things all year round that we get to celebrate, and there's a lot of things that can be done there.
Fabulous, thank you. Anything anyone wants to add to what Eric's had to say there?
I think just one quick build on that, completely echo everything Eric said, particularly to question one. I think the one thing that needs to happen, particularly in traditional legacy businesses like banking is having the right role models who are very visible right to the very top. So if we start to have representation at the very senior board level, that starts to become the norm. So that visible role model and representation is particularly key.
Thank you very much. Well, as I say, amazingly, we're running to the end of our session. I just want to say thank you very much to all of our panelists today for their insights, their openness, their honesty, and their sharing of their experiences. We did have a couple more questions come through, which we just can't do justice to in the time left on the call. But what I am going to do, I'll pick up with the organisers, and we'll see if we can get those answers back out to people, because I think there's some gems that we can lever out even after this session today. So thank you very much indeed for joining us for this first session of the day. First session for you, last session for me, such is the joy of world time zones. The next session on the agenda today is opening up conversations about suicide at work, something we've touched upon briefly today, which really does beg to be heard a little bit more. And that's going to be starting in an hour and 20 minutes. But from us for now, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.